I used to think I had it all figured out. By 60, I'd done everything a man was supposed to do. Married my college sweetheart, raised two kids who didn't hate me, retired from a job that paid the bills, and then some. The house in the suburbs was paid off. The lawn was mowed. The neighbors waved when I took out the trash. From the outside, my life looked like a damn postcard. But the truth? The house was too quiet. I'd wake up at 6:15 out of habit, even though no one needed me to. I'd make coffee, just one cup now, and stare at the backyard through the kitchen window. The bird feeder needed refilling, but I kept forgetting. Susan always remembered. She'd sit right there at the table, flipping through her gardening magazines, humming under her breath. Now the chair was just a chair. My daughter Emily called every Sunday like clockwork. "How's it going, Dad?" I'd say, "Oh, you know, keeping busy." I wasn't. I'd organized the garage 3 times. The guys at the diner still called me Lucky Jack. Retired early, no debt, grandkids on the way. What more could a man want? I'd laugh and order the usual, but the nickname stuck in my throat. Luck didn't stop Susan's cancer. Luck didn't fill the silence when I turned off the TV at night. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to her. Not out loud, just in my head. Should I paint the shed? Remember that vacation in Maine? Then I'd realize I was standing in the cereal aisle, gripping a box of Cheerios like it was a lifeline. The worst part was the bed. I still slept on my side, leaving space for her. One night, I rolled over and reached out, just a reflex, and my hand hit cold sheets. That's when it hit me. I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I was waiting for me to disappear, too. I started taking long drives after dark. No destination, just the hum of the engine and the glow of streetlights. One evening, I pulled into the parking lot of our old movie theater, the one where we'd had our first date in '82. It was a pharmacy now. I sat there for a long time watching people come and go. A young couple argued by the ATM. An old man shuffled out with a paper bag of prescriptions. Life kept moving. Mine had stopped 2 years ago, and no one had noticed. Not even me. Until that night, in the empty car, in the empty lot, staring at a building that didn't exist anymore. Something had to change. I just didn't know what. I didn't tell anyone about that night in the parking lot. Not my daughter, not my old work buddies, certainly not the guys at the diner who still called me Lucky Jack between bites of scrambled eggs. But something had shifted. The silence in the house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a held breath. Then, on a Tuesday, Emily came over with her laptop. "Just humor me, Dad," she said, and before I could protest, she'd signed me up for some senior dating site. "It's not about finding someone," she insisted. "It's about remembering how to talk to people who aren't me or the cashier at Kroger." I grumbled, but that night, alone again, I stared at the profile she'd made. Jack, 60, widower, likes jazz, old cars, and terrible puns. Susan would have laughed at that. I almost closed the app until I saw her. Carolyn, 58, art teacher, divorced. Her profile picture showed her grinning on a hiking trail, silver hair windblown, sunglasses perched on her head. The caption read, "Not looking for a caretaker or a white knight, just good conversation and maybe someone to split dessert with." I surprised myself by clicking like. She messaged me first. "So, Jack, what's the worst pun you've got?" I hesitated, then typed back the stupidest joke I knew. "Why don't skeletons fight each other? They don't have the guts." 3 dots appeared, then, "Oh God, I might regret this, but let's get coffee." We met at a little place downtown. I got there early, rehearsing lines in my head like some nervous kid. But when she walked in, wearing a purple scarf and smelling like citrus, all my prepared small talk evaporated. We talked for 2 hours. About her ex-husband, amicable, her students, chaotic, the way she'd started painting after her divorce. Turns out rage makes great abstract art. I told her about Susan, just a little. She didn't offer pity, just nodded and said, "Grief's a weird roommate, isn't it? Never pays rent." When the check came, she reached for it. I stiffened. Old habits. But she just raised an eyebrow. "I asked you, remember?" Walking to the parking lot, she hesitated. "I should say, I'm not looking for anything serious. Companionship, not a sequel. The streetlight caught the silver in her hair. But I'd love to do this again. I drove home in a daze. The house was still empty, but my chest felt full. Not happy, not yet, but alive. Then I saw it. Susan's favorite coffee mug, left untouched on the shelf since she'd last used it. A thin layer of dust had settled over the lilac pattern. I stood there gripping my keys, caught between two truths. I wanted to see Carolyn again, and that meant learning how to hold two things at once, love that was gone and something new that hadn't even taken shape. The question hummed in my skull, louder than the silence. Was I allowed to want both? I found myself cleaning Susan's coffee mug the morning before my second date with Carolyn. The water ran hot over my hands as I scrubbed away 2 years of dust, the lilac pattern emerging bright as the day we'd bought it at some long-forgotten flea market. I dried it carefully, then hesitated. Putting it back felt like surrender, throwing it away like erasure. In the end, I left it upside down on the drying rack, unresolved. Carolyn had suggested an art gallery opening. One of her former students was exhibiting. "No pressure," she'd said. "Just say hello to the real world again." The way she said it made me wonder how transparent I'd been about my isolation. The gallery was all white walls and 2 bright lights, clusters of people holding plastic cups of wine. I arrived early, lingering near a twisted metal sculpture that looked like a heart mid-explosion. Carolyn spotted me and waved, her smile widening when she saw my sport coat. "Look at you," she said, straightening my collar with fingers that smelled faintly of turpentine. "Almost like a real date." I tensed at the word. Date. Susan and I hadn't dated in decades. We'd built a life, weathered storms, known each other's silences. This felt like learning a new language mid-conversation. Carolyn guided me through the exhibit, her commentary sharp and warm. When we paused before a painting of an empty chair, she tilted her head. "What do you see?" "Loneliness," I said too quickly. She studied me. "I see possibility. The artist left it empty so you could imagine who might sit there." A man approached then, early 60s, salt and pepper beard. Carolyn introduced him as David, her ex-husband. They exchanged an easy hug, joked about some shared memory. I stood there gripping my wine glass, stunned by their comfort. Later, over tapas, Carolyn explained, "We're better friends now than we ever were married." She speared an olive. "Turns out love doesn't have to be all or nothing." I pushed my food around my plate, thinking of Susan's wedding ring still in my dresser drawer, of the way she'd squeeze my hand during thunderstorms. Carolyn reached over, stilled my fidgeting fingers. "You're not replacing her, Jack. You're just adding." That night, I stood in my bedroom doorway, staring at the bed Susan had died in. The hospice workers had long since sanitized away any trace of illness, but I still saw her there, not the vibrant woman of our prime, but the fragile shell she'd become. I realized with a start that I hadn't thought of her all evening. The guilt hit like a punch. Then something stranger. Relief. I opened my dresser, took out her ring, held it in my palm. The gold was warm from the wood. For 35 years, love had meant forever. Now Carolyn was teaching me it could also mean for now. As I placed the ring back in its velvet box, one question burned brighter than all the others. Who was I without my grief? The first time Carolyn stayed over, I found myself vacuuming the guest room at 2 a.m. The rhythmic whir of the machine drowned out my thoughts as I ran it over the same patch of carpet 3 times. Susan had always been the one to host guests, her laughter floating from the kitchen as she arranged flowers in the guest room. Now I was fluffing pillows for a woman who had kissed me goodnight at the door and asked for separate spaces just for now. I found her in the kitchen at dawn, barefoot in one of my old college sweatshirts, squinting at the coffee maker. "You still use a percolator?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. I watched her fingers, paint-stained and sure, fumble with the antique contraption Susan had cherished. When she finally got it working, she poured 2 mugs and handed me one. Our fingers brushed, and I felt it again. That simple, terrifying thrill of being touched. Later, as sunlight streamed through the curtains we'd never bothered to close, Carolyn studied the family photos lining the hallway. She paused before our last vacation picture, Susan and I at the Grand Canyon, her face already gaunt from treatments but still smiling. Carolyn didn't offer platitudes, just rested her fingertips lightly on the frame and said, "She had kind eyes." I took her to the botanical garden that afternoon, a place Susan and I had visited every anniversary. The rose bushes were past their prime, petals drifting to the ground like confetti. Carolyn knelt to examine a particularly bedraggled bloom, her knees sinking into the mulch. "See?" she said, cradling the drooping flower. "Even when they're dying, they're still beautiful." That night, as I lay alone in my bed, I realized I could hear Carolyn breathing down the hall. The sound was unfamiliar, not the labored wheeze of Susan's final months, but the easy rhythm of someone at peace in their solitude. I rose quietly and opened Susan's closet for the first time in years. Her sweaters still hung there, mothballs tucked in the pockets. I pressed my face to the blue cardigan she'd worn on cool evenings and inhaled deeply. The scent of her was almost gone. In the dark, I made my first real decision since her death. I would keep one sweater, just one. The rest could go. As I folded the soft wool into a donation bag, my hands shook. Not from grief, but from the dawning understanding that love wasn't a zero-sum game. The space Carolyn occupied didn't diminish what Susan and I had shared, but when I returned to bed, a colder thought followed. What if I was ready to move on, but the world wasn't ready to let me? The next morning, I caught Carolyn studying me over her coffee mug. Susan's mug, the lilac one from the drying rack. She held my gaze as she took a deliberate sip. A challenge, a promise. And suddenly, I couldn't tell which terrified me more, that she might stop using it or that she might keep going. It started as pressure, a dull weight beneath my breastbone that morning as I tied my shoes. I told myself it was indigestion from the spicy Thai food Carolyn had insisted we order the night before. But when the pain shot down my left arm in the produce aisle, sending a bag of oranges rolling across the grocery store floor, I knew. The fluorescent lights of the ER burned my eyes as nurses cut away my shirt. Machines beeped in frantic rhythm with my pulse. In the chaos, one thought surfaced. This is how Susan must have felt, stripped bare, vulnerable, her body betraying her. Then Carolyn was there, still in her paint-splattered jeans, her hand cool against my forehead. "Don't you dare leave me to explain modern art by myself," she whispered. Her attempt at humor faltered when they wheeled me away, but her fingers clung to mine until the last possible second. It wasn't a major heart attack, just a warning. A wake-up call, the cardiologist called it. They kept me overnight for observation. Carolyn never left, sleeping upright in the vinyl chair, her neck bent at an angle that would leave bruises. At 3 a.m., I watched the glow of the heart monitor cast red shadows across her face. She looked older in this light, the lines around her mouth deeper. Human. When they discharged me, Carolyn drove my car home with exaggerated care, both hands at 10 and 2. The silence between us felt different now, weighted with all the things we weren't saying. As we pulled into the driveway, she finally spoke. "You know, this changes things." Inside, she made tea with shaky hands. I noticed she used Susan's mug again, but this time the sight didn't twist my gut. Maybe because Carolyn's thumb kept tracing the same spot on the handle, a nervous tick I'd never seen before. That night, as I lay propped up on pillows, Carolyn hesitantly stretched out beside me, not touching, just present. The space between our bodies felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "I thought I'd lost you," she said to the ceiling. I turned my head to study her profile, the strong nose, the stubborn chin. This woman who had carved space in my life without demanding I clear out the past. My chest ached, but not from damaged arteries. She fell asleep first, her breath evening out. Carefully, so carefully, I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. My wedding band caught the moonlight, still on after all these years. The monitor they'd sent home beeped softly in the dark, a reminder that time wasn't infinite, that hearts could fail in more ways than one. As dawn crept through the blinds, I found myself wondering, Was survival enough, or did I dare to live? The doctor's orders sat on the kitchen counter like a guilty verdict: low sodium, daily walks, stress reduction. I stared at the list while Carolyn chopped vegetables for a heart-healthy meal, her knife hitting the cutting board with precise, angry thumps. She hadn't said a word about the wedding ring I still wore. Not when she helped me shower, not when she washed my clothes. But I saw her notice. Every time. On my first solo walk around the neighborhood, I passed the O'Connor's house. Through their window, I could see Jim feeding his wife spoonfuls of oatmeal, her hands trembling with Parkinson's. They'd been married 52 years. I stood there clutching my chest like a penitent, watching Jim wipe Doris's chin with infinite tenderness. That used to be me with Susan. That used to be us. When I got home, Carolyn was painting at the dining room table, wild swirling strokes of blue and gray. She didn't look up as I caught my breath in the doorway. "Your daughter called," she said. "She wants to take you to cardiac rehab." A pause. I told her I'd drive you. The next morning, I found my wedding ring on the bathroom sink, not placed there dramatically, just left beside the toothpaste cap like any ordinary object. I picked it up, expecting guilt. Instead, I felt only the cool metal against my palm, smooth from decades of wear. Cardiac rehab was all fluorescent lights and motivational posters. The physical therapist had us march in place to oldies music. Beside me, a 70-year-old named Frank wheezed through the exercises. "Widower?" he asked during the cool-down. When I nodded, he grinned. "My Martha's been gone 8 years. Took me 6 to take off the ring." He patted my shoulder. "You're ahead of schedule, kid." That night, Carolyn and I sat on the back porch watching fireflies. She'd been quieter since my heart attack, more careful with me. It made my chest ache in a way the nitroglycerin couldn't fix. "You don't have to stay," I said finally. She turned, her face half in shadow. "I know." The unspoken question hung between us. I thought of Susan's ring still sitting on the sink, of Jim O'Connor spoon-feeding his wife, of the way Carolyn's hands had trembled when she signed my hospital discharge papers. Carolyn reached over and laced her fingers through mine, the first time she'd initiated contact since the ambulance ride. Her skin was warm, paint still crusted along her cuticles. Real, alive. Now I squeezed back, feeling my pulse thud in a way that had nothing to do with damaged arteries. The future stretched before us, not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd feared, but something entirely new. And that terrified me more than any heart attack ever could, because what if, after all this time, I didn't know how to be happy? The house was too quiet after Carolyn left. Not the heavy silence of Susan's absence, but something lighter, almost expectant, like the pause between breaths. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the morning light filter through the trees we'd planted when Emily was born. The leaves were just beginning to turn, edges tinged with gold. I hadn't realized I was still holding Carolyn's note until the paper grew damp in my palm. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. "I can't love you halfway, Jack, but I won't ask you to choose between your past and a future with me. That's a decision you have to make on your own." For the first time in years, I let myself really look at Susan's things, not with grief, but with something closer to curiosity. The quilt she'd stitched for our anniversary. Half finished. The stack of mystery novels she'd loved, their spines cracked from rereading. The way she used to hum off-key in the shower. These weren't just memories. They were proof she'd existed, that we'd existed. But they didn't have to be shackles. I found Carolyn's paintbrush behind the couch, bristles stiff with dried acrylic. It was the small, frayed one she'd used for details, the one she'd complained about needing to replace. I turned it over in my hands, remembering how she'd bite her lip in concentration, how she'd squint when the light wasn't quite right. The truth settled over me slowly, like snow. Love wasn't a finite resource. It didn't diminish because it was shared. Susan had been my home for 35 years, but Carolyn was the open window, the fresh air, the reminder that life wasn't over yet. I drove to her apartment with the paintbrush and my heart in my throat. She answered the door in her oversized sweatshirt, eyes puffy, hair piled in a messy bun. She didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let me in. Her living room was strewn with canvases, some finished, some half-painted, all vibrant and alive in a way I'd forgotten how to be. I held out the brush. "You left this." She took it, her fingers brushing mine. "You didn't have to bring it." "Yes," I said. "I did." We stood there, the space between us charged with everything unsaid. Then, quietly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out Susan's ring. Not to put it away, not to give it up, but to finally hold it up to the light and see it for what it was, a love that had been real and a love that still could be. Carolyn's breath hitched. She didn't reach for the ring, just cupped my hands in hers, her thumbs tracing my knuckles. "You don't have to decide right now," she whispered. But I was already deciding, not between the past and the future, but to stop pretending I could live in only one at a time. The question wasn't whether I deserved this. It was whether I was brave enough to take it. And for the first time in years, the answer wasn't no.